Hey, this week we talk about Silverblue, we talk about Windows getting Sudo, we talk about why you should really be using KDE and Fedora, not GNOME or Ubuntu, and then we talk about some neat stuff coming for kernel continuous integration. It's a lot of fun, you don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 138, recorded Saturday, February the 10th. If let sum equals variable. Hey, welcome. It is Saturday once again, and you know what that means. It is time to get geeky about some Linux news and tips. It's the Untitled Linux Show. It is not just me. We have the full cohort. I had to go in and reprogram the buttons. It's the 4-way instead of the 3-way. We've got everybody today. I don't know what to do with this. Well, I know what to do with this. We're going to dive into it and we're going to talk about some news. And we're going to let Rob go first. I think that's because Rob is the one that made the notes today, so he put himself at the top of it. And Rob, rising like the phoenix, which I love what David said in the back chat. Let's see, how did it go? If it weren't for the ashes, a phoenix would just be a bird getting up.
Yeah, so this week I have a lot of Linux news that isn't exactly Linux news. So let's start with the one that is first. So I think we've touched on Immutable desktops before on the show, and we probably have mentioned Fedora Silverblue as one of those options. Another very popular Immutable distro is SteamOS for the Steam Deck. Ubuntu Core had plans to release their Immutable desktop in April, but that has since been delayed. And Android too. Everybody knows about Android. So, well, with the seeming growth in popularity for Immutable desktops, the Fedora folks thought it was time to lay out the groundwork for spins to be able to utilize the Fedora Immutable desktop framework that was showcased in Silverblue. And actually, this isn't a new project, as Project Atomic, which is what it's been called, was announced almost 10 years ago. But this week, Fedora has announced the new family of Project Atomic desktops. So Project Atomic has already seen a few spins since its creation, including Fedora Silverblue, Fedora Kinoite, that's Kinoite.
I think it's Kinoite. I think.
That sounds even better. Kinoite. Fedora Sway Atomic, formerly Fedora Circia, sure. And then Fedora Budgie Atomic, formerly called Fedora Onyx. So the Fedora Atomic Desktops brand provides for a clear way to discuss the functionality of RPM-OS tree. And even though it is referred to as immutable, Fedora Atomic spins do offer some flexibility as there are methods to bypass their read-only characteristics. Now, with this growing family of immutable desktops, is this right for you? So I feel like we should touch on what an immutable desktop is. I'm sure we've mentioned it in passing, but it seems there is often a misconception with some people. I was recently in a discussion where someone had said, an immutable desktop is fine for a system you never plan to change. Assuming that immutable means not changing, which it does, but assuming that it's just going to stay exactly how you install it, which isn't, that's not true. In the case of Immutable Linux, it's not true. It isn't 100% unchangeable. For example, Android, as I said at the top of the story here, that is an immutable system, and obviously you can update it. Now, if you have one of those third-party phones, you may not be updating it very often, but that's a different story, and one that Google and Android are, working towards improving. But anyway, what this means for Linux is the system at its core, it's essentially write protected, and all the software is installed and ran in a containerized form, such as Flatpaks, Ubuntu core plans to do snaps, and whatever Android does to separate their apps from the system. So this makes it a lot harder to break your system because it separates the user programs from the core system itself. But it isn't 100% immutable, as a system can still be updated or bypassed when needed. There's usually ways around it, even for manual, if you want to manually get something installed on it that's going to be immutable software. And I'm not quite sure about Fedora, but Android essentially, I believe the way they do it is they have like 2 images of the system at a time. So when you're updating, if the update fails, it can fall back to the old image. I'm not sure if Fedora is implementing that. I'm guessing with the Btrfs as their default and the snapshots. I'm thinking they probably are, because there are technologies that allow for this in Linux as well. So as an immutable desktop, it's not for me yet. I really like to tinker and play with things, but have you guys, do you guys have anything to add?
So I will say that when you talk about immutable desktops, it's not binary. There is a whole range of how immutable is your desktop. I mean, I think on pretty close to the extreme, you've got Android, where, large portions of and of course, Android is not a desktop. Stick with me here. With Android, though, large portions of the system are literally mounted read-only, and the only way that you get to change things is by installing an update. A full system update that's an entire. Well, it's a .zip, but it may touch everything, but it isn't all at once. Whereas, you've got Fedora, and when they talk about an immutable desktop, they're really just talking about this idea of snapshots, and that it's transactional. And so if you have something go wrong, you can just roll back to a previous transaction. And so there's, I guess the simple way to say that is that term, immutable desktop, it can mean different things to different distros. I'm not ready to go there yet, at least not on my machines, but it's fascinating. I could see it being useful for certain people.
As much
Especially
as
for production workstations.
Yeah, potentially for production workstations, maybe even like kiosks, places like that where you don't want any of your changes to stick around. You want to be able to go back to that previous transaction, the system, exactly the state it was.
And in discussions I've had with it, that one I was talking about where that person threw out that silly idea. One thing I said is like, it'd probably be great for grandma, grandpa, young children. You want a somewhat unbreakable system. And, I'm sure Ken, with his love of snaps, would love to go to Ubuntu Core.
Yeah, I think Ubuntu Core is trying to be something very different than what the Fedora Atomic desktops are trying to be.
It does. I haven't looked. It does seem a little different the way Ubuntu is going for the core and then the snaps on the outside, where Fedora is using the RPM OS tree model.
Yeah, so I was informed about something today. I don't think I have this in the notes otherwise. I'm going to go ahead and tuck it in here. Did you know that snaps require a out of tree kernel patch to actually get all of their security benefits? Mm-hmm.
So you can still use it. You just don't get all the benefits. So if you install snaps on Fedora,
it is not as sandboxed. It does not have the same element of sandboxing as it does on Ubuntu, because there is at least one kernel patch that, for whatever reason, the Ubuntu folks have not pushed across the goal line to actually get it into the kernel. And so I find it fascinating to talk about this idea. Well, the other distros will surely pick up snaps. It's like, maybe not until Ubuntu actually gets serious about putting it in the kernel the right way.
Hey, it's early in the year. I got time for my prediction. It's just, this stuff takes time. They hired somebody to help spread the love across multiple distros. So
and maybe that's
probably coming.
Maybe that's what that developer is going to be doing. Ken.
Maybe they will be. Maybe they've been trying to push it, but haven't been able to get approval for it yet.
That is
I'm sure
not
we
the
would have heard of
way.
that.
That is not the way that I heard that. I heard it more like this is typical for Ubuntu, that they come up with these great ideas and start trying to do it, and then just kind of lose interest in getting it upstreamed.
And if they did try to upstream it, if it got turned down, there had been stories about it, and we would have talked about it, and we would have heard about totally drawn a blank. The head of Linux guy, Torvald, Linus Torvald. Yeah, obviously, I draw blanks.
Easy name to forget.
Yeah.
Linux, Linus. Okay, so anyway, we'd hear a story about him saying, "You canonical folks, why do you put in this stupid stuff in here? You got to comment it better."
Rob,
indeed,
your Microsoft is showing.
Yes. All right, so let's move on. Save Rob from any further embarrassment. Let's talk about why you should be using KDE instead of GNOME, and why you should be using Fedora instead of Ubuntu. And yes, I'm trolling, but at the same time, I'm serious. So we've got, first off, the latest pointed stick update about the KDE 6 mega release and the changes and fixes that are landing there, coming very soon. Very soon, by the way. KDE 6 is going to be out stable. And one of the things that really fascinates me the most here is that they've said they're removing an option because hardly anybody uses it. And so now active screen is just going to follow the mouse, which that seems like a kind of a no-brainer to me. So if you have multiple screens, whichever one your mouse is on at the time, that's considered the active screen. So fun stuff in there. And then there was this story on Phronix about GNOME and the upcoming GNOME release, GNOME 46. We just hit the API ABI freeze for that. And the stable release of that's going to happen March 16th. And it looks like GNOME 46 is going to not have any variable refresh rate. So that's your FreeSync. I forget what NVIDIA calls theirs, but it G-Sync. Yes, was whispered into my ear that it's called G-Sync. No support for that in GNOME, which really kind of surprises me because we've had that over in KDE for quite a while. And then I talked about something, I think it was on our first of the year show, about how Ubuntu 24.04 was going to be such a big deal. And one of the things that I was predicting, I was wrong. And I'm disappointed. Not in myself, but in Ubuntu. Ubuntu 24.04 LTS is not going to ship KDE Plasma 6. They're going to stick with KDE Plasma 5. And there are two reasons why this is disappointing. For one, as soon as KDE releases 6.0, it is done shipping updates to the 5 series. KDE does not have any sort of, from what I can tell, any sort of LTS support for KDE 5, which means that the entire life cycle of Ubuntu 24.04, they're going to start that life cycle shipping an out-of-date and unsupported KDE release. And the other side of this is the release date for KDE 6 was intentionally chosen to try to get both Fedora 40 and Ubuntu 24.04 to both be able to use KDE 6. And so it's a bad move, Ubuntu. Sorry, I'm not mad, but I'm disappointed.
They've got the engineers. They could backport it. They could backport it for 10 years.
They very likely will when you get to 24.04.3.
Well, but I don't think they're ever going to push it to KDE 6. I don't think they'll do that midstream. They'll wait for 24.10.
Well, there's a lot of talk. So I've read some stuff on that, and there was a lot of talk about that. One of the problems they thought was it had about 1 day to pull in the patches before the freeze came on, and they were unsure about a brand new, barely released 6.0 going into 24.04.
Extend it out a week. Fedora pushes all the time.
So that kind of doesn't hold water because I've been running KDE 6 for like a month now.
Right.
Yeah, but these are developers. They're not as good as you.
It just doesn't hold water. No, but I mean, the idea, there's not going to be a whole lot of changes. So KDE 6 has been in feature freeze for weeks now. And so it's not like they had to wait until the KDE 6 final release to be able to start looking at it. Part of the problem is that Ubuntu does not have a rawhide. Ubuntu has Debian SID, right? So Fedora, as soon as Fedora 39 releases, rawhide keeps on rolling. And, there's just this deluge of new packages. Pretty much as soon as 39 came out, they started working on KDE 6 support because they knew it was coming. They knew where everything was going to line up. And they had this huge playground called rawhide where they could do that. And apparently Ubuntu does not have that. Ubuntu has Debian SID, and it's just not quite the same thing. It's we forget sometimes, but Ubuntu is a downstream of Debian, whereas Fedora is the top of the stream. It is not a downstream from anything. So there was a YouTuber put out a video just today, I think, talking about how Fedora is experimental and that's okay. It's like, I don't know that I exactly call it experimental, but it is. It's at the top of the stream, and that means it is bleeding edge by definition. So I stick by my statement. You should be using Fedora and KDE.
iLag has a question about what's rawhide.
Oh, rawhide. Rawhide is a rolling release, but it is so if Fedora is like the edge of the knife, then rawhide is the flesh that you're cutting into. Oh, that came out weird. No, rawhide is like the fire hose of Fedora. It is where things land first. Things can be broken. We always used to say, don't run rawhide, it'll eat your babies. Meaning that it is literally was dangerous to run it on a production machine. It's gotten a little bit better now, but it's where things land first.
Arch says I'm cutting edge, and rawhide says, here, hold my beer.
Pretty much. Yes.
I mean, Ubuntu does have Ubuntu Rhino, which is rolling. So theoretically, they could have been ahead of the curve there a little bit. But also, I think that probably focuses on GNOME.
Yeah, probably.
I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction that you won't see KDE 6 in any Ubuntu, whether it's Rhino, until you see 24.10 come out.
Yeah.
In other words, next October.
Yeah.
Kubuntu is the only one, so.
Well, I mean, it's not like you don't have the packages in Ubuntu. It's just installed by default.
They're all going to be based off of the same.
Right.
Well, there's actually talk after 24.04 comes out, rolling a because they have the backports repositories, which is kind of not as cutting edge as like rawhide or something, and there's limits to what they do, but they'll run a lot of the beta software, alpha software in there, and they're talking about having a repository so that if you're running 2404, little later in, a couple months in, you can actually switch to KDE 6 if you want, because they want to get more testing time on that.
Interesting. One more thought about Fedora Rawhide, just to understand where it's at. I'm running on the machine behind me. It's running Rawhide. It's running a 6.8 kernel, one of the RCs already. But a couple of weeks ago, when I first got the kernel update, it was running 6.8 RC0, meaning it was just a snapshot of current kernel in the middle of the merge window. That is how bleeding edge Fedora can be. It's scary sometimes, but it's fun.
Well, and remember that Ubuntu 2404 is going to come out with the 6.8 kernel is what they're planning on. And I've got a story later where it might even be a little more different and optimized. So that on top of a brand new desktop, because I was reading some of the mailing list stuff, and they're like, they just didn't feel safe with an LTS. If this would have been a .10 release, I think they would have included it. But this is going to have 12 years of support, and they were just nervous about it.
I would be nervous about offering 12 years of support for a software package that's no longer being developed on. But that's just me.
Yeah, 12 years of support on an end-of-life product rather than something that's at least got a few years in it.
That is end of life when you ship it. Goodness. Anyway, Jeff, let's talk about something else that's bleeding edge, and Google dropping a little bit of change into something.
Yeah, now, while not directly Linux news, this is tied into it quite a bit. Google's pledged to give the Rust Foundation to improve the interoperability between C++ and Rust $1 million. So Google's interest in this is to squash a bunch of the memory errors in Android apps. And for those who don't know, Android is Linux or based on Linux, depending on where your particular proclivities lie. C++ is a language of the Linux kernel and a lot of what powers, Linux distributions in general, not exclusively, but a majority. C++ can let a programmer bang the metal, meaning to get really low level into the hardware to control the registers. And, some languages are not able to do that. And that's why C++ is what powers a lot of operating systems and, from games to large enterprise programs. And C++ gives a lot of freedom to the programmer, but it also means they're free to make mistakes and have memory holes. Well, Rust has come along about 8 years ago, started at Mozilla, and the major difference between C++ and Rust ideology-wise is Rust enforces memory safety along with things like type safety and concurrency. So now there's other differences, but think of Rust like C++ with some safety nets. And I do want to say that's an analogy for the non-programmers out there. Programmers will be able to rattle off a lot of differences, but in this reference, I'm simply stating why some projects are wanting to move from C++ to Rust. So why the Google money? Well, if you have a software organization, commercial or open source, and they're heavily invested into C++, it can take a lot of resources to switch to another programming language. And all your tools, all your knowledge is C++, and learning a new language can be daunting while still trying to keep up output. So there are Rust advantages, though, that, some organizations really do want to take advantage of it. And, it'd be easier if the learning curve wasn't so steep. Well, as it says in the article linked in the show notes, even given the growing popularity and adoption of Rust, it would be unrealistic to expect even the most technically advanced organizations to easily pivot to Rust and away from the architecture of existing code bases. So the basis of the pledge is to allow Rust to call C++ functions easily. So if you're going to have a Rust program, it needs to call the libraries that you already have built for your project, which would be C++. The ways that this can be done are wrapper libraries, direct tooling, build system support, and modifications to application binary interfaces, or ABIs. For those programmers out there, they know there have already been projects and work done to make this happen by different groups, but the hope is that the donation will help tighten it up. The Rust Foundation is going to get a scope of work for use this money, get a scope of work for the proposals, then they'll get a draft by the Leadership Council with help from the Rust project leaders and the relevant Rust Foundation member organizations, and of course the board. After that, the work will begin, and they'll either do it themselves or they'll support other projects which are already working on these interoperability goals. So any of my co-hosts have any thought of this? I know at least one really is pro-Rust.
So in a different Discord server just today, we were talking about security stuff, and someone made the suggestion that one of the problems with Rust, and we'll get to the actual story that this is about here in a minute. One of the problems of Rust is there's not as many programmers that can read it, so you're going to run into more logic problems with it. And I was going to jump in there and say, wait a second, surely reading Rust can't be that hard. I mean, I can make do with so many different languages, PHP, C, JavaScript. I mean, there's just little differences between them. Surely Rust isn't that hard. And then I actually went to a Rust project and pulled up some Rust code and looked at it. And it's like, if let sum equals variable. I'm like, what in the world does this mean? So Rust could be a challenge when you first dive into it. Learned that the hard way.
I mean, like going from any other language to English?
I guess. Well, no, I don't know.
Worse.
Maybe I've.
I was thinking Java.
Well, I've done Java though. That's it. I've gone from C++ to Java and back, and JavaScript and all. Like Java.
Yeah, I don't like Java, but
I don't like Java, but I can write
it's
in
not
Java.
bad,
It's not hard to write in. But like I looked at that Rust code for the first time, and it's like, what are you doing? And then I did a little more research, and I figured out, oh, okay, you're basically doing you've got an enum, and all your enums are of this type, and so you're basically saying if this thing happens to be equal to one of these enums, and it's just a slick way to do it. It's like, all right, I kind of understand what you're doing here now, but it's just like this is the first time I'd ever seen it.
Sort of like comparing COBOL to BASIC.
I've programmed in BASIC, not in COBOL. I got started.
I miss Fortran 77.
I got started with Microsoft's QBasic. QBasic 4.5, I think, was one of the ones that we used. Fun times. Little tyke me on mom and dad's computer. You found QBasic, and it's like, oh, you can make the computer do what you want it to. It's a whole new world.
My only feedback really is, 20, 30 years ago, I mean, it's great that they're giving money. And 20, 30 years ago, $1 million would have been a lot. But these days, I mean, $1 million. It's kind of like that movie.
Yeah.
Like Austin Powers. No. Yeah, Austin Powers. It's like that. It's like he's out of the past and saying, give me $1 million. And everyone laughs at him. It's like, It's like, hey, we give them $1 million. Everyone's going to laugh at them because they got so much money they could. That's like, here's a quarter. Here's a quarter for your time.
Well, I mean, so you think about it, $1 million, that's what? Being able to hire 4 or 5 programmers full time for a year? Or a couple of them for 3 years? Something like that? Like roughly. So that's what we're talking about. I mean, that's not nothing. That you can get a lot done with competent programmers. You put three of them on a job for a couple of years, you get a lot done with that.
It's good for the Rust environment. I just feel like it's not much for Google.
No, that's true. That's true. It's not a whole lot. At the same time, though, there does come a point of diminishing returns where it's like, if you threw $1 million at it, or if you threw $2 million at it, well, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot more with $2 million because there's not a whole lot of point of putting 6 developers on a 3 developer problem.
Maybe they just got to leave that caveat. Here's $1 million. And if you do good, there's more where that came from.
I honestly think that's probably the plan because if it's a good success and they're making good progress, they'll go, well, we're going to fund this for another year, or 2 years, or whatever. And but if they just go crazy with the money and it's like, we're not getting what we want out of it.
Maybe they can fix the readability of it.
Well, I mean, come on, $1 million for Google. Yeah, okay. I mean, around $1 million for Google is a rounding error as far as they're concerned. So it's an easy way to dip their toe in without totally getting a number that is going to financially hurt them on the books.
I just figured if you had a hard time reading it, Jonathan, it must be terrible.
Well, it's not terrible. It's just it's different. It's a new enough language that it's pretty different than anything else I've ever looked at. It's kind of like when you get into one of the other early things that I did was a lot of C programming. And when you go from C programming to like impressive C++ programming, where you've got, the templating and you've got objects that are inheriting from other objects, and some of that,
I hate objects.
It just kind of makes your hair curl looking at it for the first time while you're trying to figure out, like, all right, is this an inheritance? Why is that virtual? What does it even mean for this class to be virtual? I can see it right here. I mean, it's on a computer, so it's all virtual. Yeah, it was that. It was like that. It was like that. Let's go ahead, Ken.
Just makes you wonder if that $1 million is one of their accountants looking, saying, "We need a tax write-off."
Could be.
Could be.
All right, Ken.
It's that time of year.
Let's talk. Well, it's the time of the year for the Raspberry Pi, apparently. Let's talk about your Pi news.
Yes, I've got a group of stories here, all from Giorgio Mendoza, and I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. And he's writing for LinuxGizmos.com about 52Pi, a company that's introduced several add-ons specifically for the Raspberry Pi 5. First is their NVDigi or NVDigi. This is a flexible expansion board that seamlessly combines high-quality S/PDIF audio output with increased storage capacity. It basically provides superior SPDIF audio output by incorporating the Hi-Fi Berry Digi Plus. The NVDigi directly connects to the Raspberry Pi 5's I2S sound port, ensuring clean audio signal integrity without the need for USB conversion. Mm-hmm. Its product page states it delivers high-quality audio and supports sample rates up to 192 kilohertz at 24 bits. The NVDigi also supports the NVMe 2242. I think that's a mistype in the article, and 2230 SSDs for significant storage enhancement. Speaking of storage enhancements, 52Pi also introduced 2 new hats designed to enhance the Raspberry Pi 5 storage capacity through its new PCIe interface. The NO4 board supports a range of NVMe M2 SSD sizes, including NVMe 2230, 2240, 2260, and 2280 Gen 3. Excuse me. To enhance data transfer speeds and boost the efficiency of booting processes. The NO5 board accommodates NVMe M2 drives in sizes 2230 and 2240, featuring a PCIe X1 interface compatible with Gen 2 and Gen 3 standards. They both feature PCIe ultra-short signal lines for reliable connectivity, LED indicators for disk activity, and an M2 standard compliant power system with a 3 amp voltage regulator. The NO4 features a ventilation hole design for cooling, cutouts for the display camera FPC cables, while the NO5's hollow design aids in better cooling. Jonathan, looks like we're getting a lot more boards out there for the new Raspberry Pi 5.
Yes, the PCI Express header on the Pi 5 is going to make a lot of neat things possible. I will point out it is a 2242. And that's just the width by the length, by the way. It's 22 millimeters by 42 millimeters. I think it's in millimeters. It may be centimeters. I don't know. I don't do metric. I could tell you in inches.
Millimeters.
It is millimeters. All right. But that first hat that you mentioned, it took me a minute to figure out what the point of it was, right? Why would you want SPDIF and storage on the same device? And then I went, oh, it's for home theater PCs. It's exactly what it's for.
Oh yeah, that's the magic thing right there. Mm-hmm. Because, okay, SPDIF, S/PDIF, Sony Philips digital interface. So what you do is all your music stays digital out that interface. It can either be electrical or optical, mm-hmm. and then you feed it to a DAC or a digital audio conversion chip, mm-hmm. and you can have much better sound quality, and then you feed it to your nice stereo. You're not relying on a...
I'm sure in some cases you're feeding SPDIF all the way right into the stereo. A lot of them have decoders built into them.
Or that. And it's going to be better than a super cheap DAC that,
yes,
the lowest common denominator DAC versus, okay, you can spend a couple bucks on it or,
Mm-hmm.
Now, personally, I can't tell the difference between a super high end, but, you spend just a few bucks on a DAC. I think it sounds better.
Yeah, well, one of the big differences that you can run into is just noise floor. Like when you turn it on, do you hear the hiss in the audio? Whereas a really nice DAC, you shouldn't be able to.
Right.
There's a lot of.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's going to be a lot of cool things coming out for the Pi 5. I saw an advertisement this week for, this is purely aesthetics, really. It's just for a little mini tower. So like making your Pi 5 into like a tiny little desktop tower. And it was really cool. In fact, I almost bought the thing and I don't even have a Pi 5 yet.
You can get them, the Pi 5. They're not unobtainium quite the way that they were.
Yeah.
Didn't take me that long to get one.
Yeah. I just really don't need it.
but you do, Rob. See, that's the thing. You really do.
You need two of them.
At least two of them.
Well, that tower, that they should have a built-in, what is that called? Setup for clusters.
Oh, yeah, there you go. I don't know if I've bragged about it here yet, but I've actually snagged Eben Upton. We're going to interview him for Floss Weekly coming in a couple of weeks, so I'm excited about that. That's going to be fun.
And he must be somebody big with Raspberry Pi?
He is the Raspberry Pi guy.
Founder? Or
yes. He's also Jason Statham in disguise. Heard
that, I guess. Somewhere, probably here.
They do look similar, but yeah, that's the evergreen joke about Eben Upton. All right, Rob, since you're the one giving us the news, you want to talk about is this about Office 365 or about Sudo?
Oh, well, here's a little story I call Sudo Office 365. Imagine being in the command prompt with regular user privileges, and you need to run a program, let's say it's called Office 365, with administrator privileges. You probably want to use something like sudo, right? Sudo Office 365. Well, soon you will be able to do something like this. That is, in Windows, you'll be able to do something like this. So Microsoft is taking another cue from Linux, or I suppose Unix. I believe sudo's goes back further than Linux. I think that's originally a Unix-based program. So it's taking it from their playbook. We're taking it from our playbook, us Linux guys, by adding the sudo command to Windows. One thing I often hear about Linux is it's so hard because you have to use the command line, and in Windows you don't use the command line. And this isn't true at all. General users can normally get by running Linux without ever touching the command line just fine. And advanced Windows users and admins are often in the Windows command line. Honestly, due to my day job, not because I have a love for Windows, but due to my day job, I'm in the Windows command line probably more than I am on Linux, or it's at least a close tie. But the point is, I use the Windows command line often, all day long, and sometimes I need to open a prompt with admin privileges. Up until now, that meant right-clicking on CMD. Usually I go to Start menu, type in CMD, so the command comes up, right-clicking, selecting Run as Administrator. Well, sometimes I would forget, and to open as admin, I'd be a regular user, and then I'd have to, I run the command, it's like, you need admin privileges, so I gotta close the thing and reopen it again. Well, with this new Unix-like feature hitting Windows, if I forget, I could just use sudo. So now I just gotta wait for a binutils package to be bundled into Windows, and I don't mean via WSL. I mean actually in there, and I could have my whole Linux-like world just there for me on the Windows command line, and wouldn't that be great?
So I was going to ask, you say you play around in the Windows command line a lot. Do you reach first for cmd.exe or PowerShell.exe?
It depends. I mean, honestly, I'm looking up in Google, how do I do this? And then if it's command line, it's command line. If it's PowerShell, it's PowerShell. I know the IP config and the basics, but often I'm doing some long thing like in the WMIC area, which you can do a lot of stuff in there. I'm probably in the CMD more than PowerShell, but
And just for the record, Sudo was first conceived and implemented by Bob Korgshaw and Cliff Spencer around 1980 at the Department of Computer Science at Sunny/Buffalo, and it ran on a VAX system running BSD 4.1.
Which, for those who don't know, that is before Linux. But BSD, not even Unix exactly. So
BSD's awesome.
It's Unix-like.
Yeah, but it's
like
not,
Linux is.
Like Bell Unix.
Yeah, just like Linux is Unix-like. It's not Unix. But.
So
it surprised me it was 4.1.
Yeah, I would have figured it would have been earlier than that. But,
one.
Yeah.
So Sue, just super user, or I think that actually stands for switch user. That would have been around for much longer, I'm sure. But the idea of sudo, do something as super user, is a newer invention.
That surprises me a little bit that that's a BSD, because I believe, I don't use BSD much, but doas is kind of, I thought that was the BSD alternative to sudo, and I know it's available in Linux too, but I thought that came from sudo. Maybe all this stuff comes from BSD like that.
Everything comes from BSD.
It all comes from BSD.
So there is one more little wrinkle to this story, and that is apparently the sudo implementation in Windows is, first off, written mainly in Rust for security reasons. But it's kind of broken when it comes to security, too. It's full of logic bugs, at least according to Tyranid, a Blogspot user. Blogspot, WordPress, blogger. Anyway.
It's version 1.
Yeah.
Or less, I don't know.
Well, yeah, true. But anyway, he's got a write-up here about various things found where, sudo really shouldn't let you get away with the thing that you're asking it to do, but because you ask nicely, it'll let you do it. And I love the last line in this blog post. I will give Microsoft props, though, for writing the code in Rust, or at least most of it. Of course, it turns out that the likelihood that it would have had any useful memory corruption flaws is very low, even if they'd written it in ANSI C. This is a good lesson on why just writing in Rust isn't going to save you if you end up just introducing logical bugs instead.
I do have to add also, earlier on in a back channel on Discord, our group here, we were talking about how Microsoft, I thought they were embrace extend, and I said, no, now they are just embrace. They love Linux, and for those watching, you can see my background here is and it's kind of clippy and a little Linux penguin embracing each other. So
it's terrible. It's terrible.
Why isn't Clippy smiling?
That's a smile. You need to get a bigger screen.
The smile is between the eyes.
That's not his nose. I guess it could be his nose.
Oh, goodness. All right, so let's talk about this one. This one is fascinating. I'm actually pretty excited about this. So two things. One, I found a new source of Linux news that I did not know about before, and two, the thing that I found that they're doing is really exciting. So Collabora is, goodness, how to even describe it? Well, they're professional Linux geeks, really. This is one of the companies that if you're, let's say, Valve, and you have a lot of money, and you want to spend some of that money to make something work on Linux, you can go give that money to Collabora, and they will make it happen for you. And they actually do some really good work. One of the things that Collabora has just announced that they have made work is continuous integration testing for the Linux kernel, specifically for DRM, the Direct Rendering Management System. So graphics. We're talking graphics on the kernel. And this is one of the complaints, and in my opinion, a fair complaint that people have about the Linux kernel is it doesn't have any automated testing. Now, there's reasons why it doesn't. It's difficult to make it happen, for one thing, such a big project. But like a really good automated testing, regression testing, in my opinion, would be a really valuable add onto the kernel and the way development happens. And so one of the things they mentioned is, you remember, I think it was last week, we talked about when Intel sent in the Intel Z driver, Torvalds went to pull it, tried to compile the kernel, and the kernel wouldn't compile with this patch sent in. And he's like, you guys can't even bother to compile test it before you send it to me. This is not okay, guys. The GitLab CI pipeline for the Linux kernels, what they're talking about here, would have caught that. So the idea is, pull this up in GitLab, you run a continuous integration test. So you essentially kick off a job, it will compile the Linux kernel on a bunch of different platforms. And then I think it even has some actual like run testing built into it. It would have caught that. It would have said, hey, compile failed on this system and this system. And you go, oh, I better fix that before I send the email to Torvalds. I think this is something that we need as part of Linux kernel development. And I'm extremely excited to see that somebody's working on it. And they even talk about here expanding this towards the end of this article, expanding it to other subsystems. And you know, they're using the free desktop infrastructure, which is just for graphics. But the thing that they're doing here, they point out that they could do this with other subsystems. So you could see file systems getting continuous integration testing, which would be amazing. Device support, all kinds of stuff. And I hope this takes off and people embrace it, because this could be a game changer for catching problems earlier with the kernel. I'm stoked.
I think that's pretty awesome, because one of the biggest testers right now is Michael Larable over at Phoronix. He catches a lot of things just running benchmarking.
It's true.
And it'd be easier to even automate it even more and not rely on a person to actually run all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I think he has some of his workflow automated even, right? Mm-hmm. Like I imagine that he does nightly pulls automatically of the kernel and runs some benchmarks. But you know, this is even a step beyond that, where you're not just doing, you know, an automated pull and benchmark. You're doing an automated pull that then gets pushed out to a bunch of different machines, and also has, you know, like a pass fail metric. And so it sets the alarms off when something breaks that shouldn't have.
True. But he's also got other, you know, he's testing various video cards, different distributions against each other, so he doesn't have time to always have all that running. So yeah. I'm excited about this too.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's awesome.
And what's really interesting is that where some of the labs are that you can actually run them. In addition to Calibra, you've got Google, and Qualcomm's got a lab now.
Yeah, I can see that. Qualcomm is trying more and more to make their stuff play nicely with the upstream kernel. They are kind of investing in that too. It's interesting to see.
And it looks like from the article, it's borrowing from Mesa 3.
I don't remember noticing that. I didn't see that.
Says that the DRM-CL is inheriting its structure from the Mesa 3D project.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's mainly based around the graphic stuff and the Mesa stuff. It makes sense. All right, Jeff, we want to talk about Mozilla.
Yeah, I've got a Mozilla corner. You know, I just can't keep off the Mozilla topic today. You know, since my last story was about Rust, which started by Mozilla. Now I have 3 more short stories involving Mozilla. So the first up is there's a new CEO for Mozilla. Mitchell Baker announced she's stepping down as CEO of Mozilla, but she isn't leaving. She's going to stay behind as the Mozilla Corporation executive chairwoman. The new CEO is going to be Laura Chambers, or at least for the remainder of the year. She's interim right now, not the permanent replacement, though could transition that way. Laura has been on the board for 3 years, has worked at Airbnb, PayPal, eBay, and other tech firms, and she's currently the CEO of Willow Innovations, which is a wearable smart breast pump company. Laura's focus, according to the announcement, will be first vision and strategy for the future, and second, outstanding execution on focus, processes, and capabilities, meaning doubling down on their core products like Firefox and building out their capabilities and innovation pipeline to bring new compelling products to market. Yes, that was a quote from the release, so that's why it was rather corporate speak. Mitchell is going to work on a couple things. First, more consistent. Now, this is going to be kind of her official role as now that she's stepping down as CEO. It's going to work on a couple of things. First, more consistencies representing Mozilla to the public, specifically focus on policy, open source, and community. And second, representing Mozilla as a unified entity. My second story is about Canonical improving the Thunderbird snap, or making it a snap for 22.0. Well, I guess it always was a snap, but they're improving it for 2404. Previously, Canonical has just been repackaging the upstream binaries into a snap package. Well, now Sebastian Batcher of Canonical has been making changes so that the snap is now compiled from source. The driver behind this is compatibility. So now non-x86 architectures can now be supported by the snap, as well as having greater control over the build and ensuring it's compliant with Ubuntu standards. For example, when we talked a few episodes ago about Ubuntu looking into compiling for CPUs with more advanced features, we talked about compiling, assuming certain levels of instruction sets were in the CPU. This could be an easy way to implement different builds for different hardware. Now, my third story is about how Mozilla is looking to make some money with a non-free, non-browser program. The program is Mozilla's Monitor Plus, which was formerly known as the free service Firefox Monitor. The service is for monitoring of exposed personal information, such as email addresses, as part of security breaches to various web services. Now, this is a paid program, which is going to cost $13.99 US a month. There might be a price break if you get a year of it. There's a chart in the article linked in the show notes that shows what the payment gets you. But basically the chart says it automates what the free program does one time and manually. So the paid program is going to be scanning 190 plus data broker sites and alerts for data breaches constantly, and will automatically remove your data from sites that are selling it. Take a look at the story linked in the show notes, and if there's something that interests you and you want to keep your information locked down as much as you can being on the internet, give it a look and see what you think.
The last one, it strikes me as a weird direction for Mozilla to go with Firefox, but
it's not really Firefox though. It was I think it started out as kind of a option for Firefox, but then this program, the paid program, is a standalone program.
It's more of a service than a program.
Yeah.
But no, it's interesting. It's essentially what Troy Hunt does with Have I Been Pwned? And I think he has I don't know if it's paid or not, but he has a service where you can punch your email address in there and he'll email you if you end up on somebody's list of breached accounts. Yeah, I don't know. It is a worthwhile service. I will say that, to know when your account has been compromised somewhere.
Yeah, and I will say, I have not tried it, so I don't know anything about it. I'm simply reporting it. I am, either recommending or saying you shouldn't. It's just here's the information.
So what'll happen? You'll set an account up somewhere on some little website, little service, whatever. You rent a car, and to get your car rental, you've got to put your email address and you got to set a password. Well, that car rental company, a couple of years down the line, they'll get hacked, they'll get breached, and somebody will go in there and be able to just download that entire database. Well, you hope that the car company has their security set up right to where you don't have raw passwords in the database. You have at least hashed passwords, which, that's the idea. You put your password in, it goes through this one direction hash, and it turns it into something that looks like gibberish. But the next time you punch your password in, it can do the same process and compare the two and know that it's the same password to put it in. But if this hash is done properly, there's no way to get your password back out of it. All right. So you get the database breach, and it's going to have your email address, maybe your username. Lord help you, it may have your credit card information and your home address in there if you put that in, and then it'll have that password hash. Well, so then what'll happen, that information all gets downloaded, gets sold on the black market, and the next thing you know, you're getting targeted emails. Hey, Ken, the car that you rented a year and a half ago, there was damage to it, and you owe us $500 for this damage. You get spam like that that's targeted, though, because they've got your information out of this data breach. Or the other thing that'll happen is your email address, and like I said, if it's one of these that does not have decent security and they can actually get your password back out of it, well, then your email address and password, they'll take that and they'll go try to log into every other website ever, and they'll get logged in with your information on some of them. And so knowing when these things happen can actually be really useful. Because one, you'll get the email from whatever service you're signed up with, whether it's Troy Hunt or Mozilla. This car rental service just leaked your information. So you get that, and then you get the email from the car rental service. You go, oh, I know what this is. You can just delete it rather than falling for it. So that is the purpose, and yeah, they're useful services.
And maybe one quick note, in Unix, when we're talking about hash files and you see like a password file and it's got information in it, that is the garbage that the hash algorithm turns your password into, and it can't go the other way. You have to have the right password to get that same garbage, and it just compares if your previous garbage matches this garbage.
Yes.
So
yes, password.
So I just want to make sure
we could
people.
We could spend a whole episode talking about password hashing, because that is a deep subject. So you have the various hashes, yes. Then you have salts and rounds, and oh my goodness, it gets complicated.
I just didn't want any new users to freak out if they saw a password file and you can't unencrypt it. It's a one-way conversion.
Yeah,
you can't can't undo it. So
on modern Linux systems, I'm pretty sure all that is in the actual password file is just like your usernames and what groups they belong to. And then you've got the shadow password file is the one where it's actually, your username and then that ugly string that usually it'll start with a $sign and then have it's got a little code at the beginning that determines what kind of hash was used. And then it may have a salt and then like a colon and then the actual hash result. And they're incomprehensible. They're ridiculously complicated.
And you say modern, but I think it's been that separate shadow file for a couple decades at least.
Yeah, let's see if we can find out.
Depending on your age, that might be modern. Let's not make assumptions.
It's definitely modern for me.
Looks like 1992. So yeah, that's the majority of the history of Linux.
How old's Pam?
Not that
she
old.
Is depends which Pam.
The pluggable authentication module.
Yeah, trying to think what the P was for. I knew it was a module.
Yeah, pluggable. Looks like 96 in Red Hat 3.0. Back when it was Red Hat Linux, not Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
I didn't want to derail this too much. I just want to make sure there was at least a basic information for our new Linux users.
Yes.
Tangents are fun.
Tangents are fun. I have to be careful with things like password hashing, though, because I've spent so much time thinking about it and writing about it. There's just that's a deep well to fall down.
About antiviruses.
Well, I don't do as much with antiviruses, but I do a little bit. Ken, what's up? What's new in the world of antivirus?
Well, thanks to Bobby Borisov, we're finding out about ClamAV rolling out version 1.3.0, marking a major feature release alongside the security patch versions of 1.2.2 and 1.0.5. These are aimed at enhancing the security and functionality of its antivirus offerings. The release of ClamAV 1.3.0 is a feature-packed update introducing several improvements and changes. Key among these is the added capability to extract and scan attachments found in Microsoft OneNote section files. ClamAV 1.3.0 also addressed compatibility and usability enhancements across different platforms and configurations. The ClamAV daemon, or ClamD, now checks the existence of directories specified for temporary files, improving error handling and stability. In addition, ClamAV has expanded its support to include file type recognition for compiled Python files. That's the .pic files you may have come across in your when you're searching directories. Enhancing its scanning capabilities, ClamAV also addressed critical security vulnerabilities by releasing patches to versions 1.2.2 and 1.0.5. These updates mitigate a potential heap overflow read bug in the OLE2 file parser and a possible command injection vulnerability in the ClamD services virus event feature. Bobby also notes that ClamAV 1.1 is now past its end of life for security fixes and will not receive further updates. He encourages users to migrate to the supported versions, the 1.0 LTS, 1.2, or 1.3 to ensure continued protection against these threats. Bobby also includes links to ClamAV release notes and downloads page if you don't want to wait for your distribution to get the updates.
I hope that they were extremely careful with the extraction of attachments. I don't think ClamAV was used, but the Barracuda email filter had a problem a few months ago. I think it was .tar files. They were, if there was a .tar sent as an attachment to an email, they were grabbing that .tar. They were not decrypting it. They were unzipping it, extracting. Thank you. That's the technical term. They were extracting it to the Barracuda file system, and then they were running a file scan on it. And they didn't properly sanitize it. And so you could have a .tar that had a file in it that used, like, for the file location, it was // which, is directory traversal upwards. And Barracuda had this issue where just by sending an email with one of these TARs, a tape archive, that stands for, one of these files, when it went to look at it, it would overwrite its own firmware, and these boxes were getting popped that way. It was not good. So whenever I see that an antivirus has added a new capability to extract attachments, makes me just a little nervous.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
But if you've run any kind of email server or email gateway, definitely, if you're not already running ClamAV, install it and run it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the pre-built ones have Clam in there at some point.
Who's crazy enough to run an email server these days?
Google.
I still run one.
Maybe I'll get back to it.
Sometimes I regret still running one, but I do. I tell you the problem I've been having with my email server recently, my provider keeps losing my reverse DNS pointers. It's happened 3 or 4 times now. I have to call them, and each time they're like, okay, we'll go reboot the server. I'm like, oh my goodness. Can I host these? Can you delegate these so that I can host them? I have a DNS server that doesn't go down. Can I host these? He's like, well, you'd have to get an ARIN number first. I'm like, oh, I don't want to mess with that.
Yeah, you have to be the owner of the IP. So maybe I'll or the IP subnet. But maybe I'll get back to email servers someday. But I've kind of got out of that a good 15 years ago.
What's an ARIN number?
ARIN is the automated registry of internet numbers. I think.
Basically, you need to own the IP subnet.
The ARIN is the American Registry for Internet Numbers. Basically, if you actually own IP addresses and you want them to be like independently routable, you have to get an ARIN number, and that's like what it does is it allows you to work with the border gateway protocol to do like heavy metal internet routing and not just IP routing. That's a whole thing in and of itself. Rob probably knows more about that than I do, actually.
I've seen it done.
There is somebody at the company you work at, Rob. There is somebody that is extremely knowledgeable about this because, the internet blows up if you don't have.
His name is Anthony.
Anthony. Anthony is the man. When there are certain problems, Anthony is the man.
There's some other people who probably know some bit about it, but we all worry about him leaving or something else.
We can't forget about Aaron.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what is up next. Rob, you are up next with more not Linux. What's up with this, man?
These aren't Linux, but they are some other interesting OSs.
Maybe we'll call them Linux adjacent.
They are Linux adjacent, take a lot of things from Linux. They're open source. So in one of the Linux groups I'm in, I was a discussion came up about a tiny yet powerful and fast non-Linux operating system called Calibri OS. That's KOLIBRIOS. And it just so happens that in the past few weeks, there are some other news stories or updates about some other non-Linux open source projects. So I thought I'd just kind of talk about all of them here. Now, I'm not recommending any of these over Linux today, especially probably not for production, but they might be fun to play with, or you may even find a niche use case for them. So let's talk about the three that I've been looking at in the past few weeks. First one that got me thinking about it, Calibri OS. The website describes it as Calibri OS is a tiny yet incredibly powerful and fast operating system. So Calibri, it could be great on an old, low-powered system like a netbook, as it only requires a few megabytes of disk space and runs on 8 megabytes of RAM. It features a rich set of applications that include word processor, a rich set, these are their words, word processor, image viewer, graphical editor, web browser even, and over 30 games. It's full fat 12, 16, 32 support, as well as read-only support for NTFS, ISO 9660, and AXT 2, 3, and 4. Drivers are written for popular sound, network, and graphic cards. What I've heard a good use case is like an old netbook if you just need to do some simple text editing, web browsing. The kernel drivers are written in assembly, and the demo I watched, it was fast and familiar to those same Windows environments you see on Windows and Linux. Had like a little start menu or super key menu at the bottom left, a taskbar at the bottom. Very, very familiar looking. And speaking of Windows, did you know there's an open source project aiming to clone Windows? I've tried it quite a few years ago, and it did a pretty decent job cloning the Windows API, but definitely not a drop-in replacement to meet every need that you could have on Windows. And that project is called ReactOS. The recent story I read about ReactOS was about improvements to the GUI mode setup, as previously, when I tried it, it was a text-based install. There's nothing wrong with text-based installs. I often use them in Linux, even when there is a GUI available. I know they're going to work, regardless of the graphics card or whatever. But one interesting thing I saw in the GUI setup screenshot, and I haven't tried this for years, I haven't used it for years, so I don't know what it really supports these days. But ReactOS apparently is supporting something Windows doesn't even support itself yet, and that is ButterFS or BTRFS, one of the more popular snapshot-based GUIs that is available in Linux. If you've been a long listener, you've heard of Butterfs. If you've been in Linux, you know Butterfs. It's the default for Fedora. So again, not something I would use in production yet, but something fun to play with. The final non-Linux OS in recent news is Redo OS. That's spelled REDOX. So Redo, not Redux, OS is it's the most Linux-like out there of these, as it is a Unix-like OS, written in Rust. So maybe this will be the Rust-based Linux distro that you'll be looking for someday. So there's quite a bit of news on Redo OS. Things are working on Redo, but what I saw as the big story was that's being done is they're porting System 76's Cosmic Desktop over to Redo. And we all know, maybe we don't all know, but Rust is very popular with the System 76, the developers of Pop! OS. Very, very, they really like Rust out there, and all their tools. I believe the Cosmic Desktop is being written in Rust, which makes it the perfect fit, the perfect opportunity for Rust to have a nice modern desktop once they port that over. So some of these projects, they've been around for years and decades. In the case of React OS, with roots all the way back to 1998. Calibri OS was forked from Menuet OS in 2004. And so they've been around for a while, but there still probably isn't a lot of production use for them yet. React OS isn't even 1.0 yet, but fun to see these projects continue. They're hobby. They seem like hobby projects, so hopefully they get somewhere before the hobbyist decides not to work on it anymore, or no one else picks it up. But have any of you ever tried any of these, or have any kind of familiarity?
So I was humored. First off, went to Calibri OS, and I thought, well, let's take a look at their source code. And they still use Subversion SVN for managing their source code, which I guess is sort of fitting. SVN was popular years and years and years ago. And then React OS, boy, I've been familiar with that for a long time. I can't remember if I've ever tried to install it or not. But yeah.
It was a VM where I tried it. I did not do it on bare metal.
But you mentioned this being hobby. Well, one of the articles I just read, React OS is apparently also a German company, and they've got enough of a budget that they have hired a developer to rework their installation flow. That's where that GUI installation is coming from. So there's some kind of money coming from somewhere. I don't know where, but somewhere.
A little more than a hobby, I guess. Maybe that place that's scratching their own itch. They don't want to use Windows, but they want to run Windows software because it can run, I don't know to the extent of it. I don't remember. It's probably better than it was when I tried it before, but it can run some Windows software.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's take a look at the... Ken, do you have something to add?
I guess there hasn't been much going on with WebOS. I've played with that a little bit back when Palm was looking at using it as one of its operating systems.
Yeah, WebOS.
LG's using it now.
Yeah, it's in TVs these days, among other things. It makes it hard to hack your TV. Whereas if you're running an Android TV, there's all kinds of fun stuff you can do, not so much with WebOS.
There's actually, I've got just posted a link in the live chat for anybody that wants to look into it. But you can put your LG TVs into developer mode and play around with installing your own home brewed apps.
Now, this is tempting me, Ken, because I have the LG TV behind me. But it's the nice LG TV. Do I want to, the last time I tried to root a TV, it stopped working for a few months until I finally found the right image to flash back over it and fix it. I don't.
When you get permission to get a replacement for it, that's when you want to try that.
Yeah. No, I like my TV. I like the TV as the monitor. My wife says, no, you don't.
At least not this year.
I imagine
for anybody. So what they're talking about, the link Ken posted in the live chat, it's www.webosbrew.org. And there's no spaces, all lowercase, no hyphens or nothing. It's all one word.
The most, let me put it this way, the most daring thing I've done with that TV is I went on Amazon and ordered the Technician remote so that I could tell it to stop auto dimming the screen, because that was driving me nuts. I was reading something or looking at code, particularly looking at code. You're just sitting there staring at it for so long, trying to understand what's going on. The screen will dim on you while you're doing it. It's like, no, wiggle them out, grab a window and wave the window around the screen to get the TV to realize, oh, somebody's still doing something here.
Is that like having a TV that's set to automatically turn off after 4 hours?
It's not quite that bad, but it's close. It's close. All right. So I've got an update for a story that we talked about. Microsoft has relented, and I don't know why, but they have. So this is the issue about Ubuntu, what is it, 18.04? Some terribly ancient version of Ubuntu. And really it's glibc less than, or glibc older than 2.28 is really what the issue is. But Microsoft, in an update to VS Code, broke support for this, connecting to VS Code running on, like, the back end part of it running on these old machines. And so this is exactly what we were talking about last week or the week before, whenever it was we were talking about it. This is, you're using your SSH plugin, you run VS Code locally on your machine and use SSH, and then the back end of VS Code runs on your remote machine. Well, so the latest update, the official update is, thank you very much for your feedback, and thank you for sharing your passion for VS Code and sharing how it is being used to enable various scenarios. We have discussed this change more in the VS Code team, and we have decided to allow VS Code to connect to an OS that is not supported by VS Code, aka no support for glibc greater than or equal to 2.28, for 12 more months. We hope that this will provide the needed time for you and your companies to migrate to newer Linux distributions. VS Code will show the appropriate dialog and banner that you are connected to an OS that is not supported by VS Code. We expect these changes to land in our recovery release that will happen later this week. Thank you. So, VS Code, you have 12 months, you rascals. Update your Linux. Oh my goodness. Don't run ancient Linux.
And then at the end it said, bug report closed.
Bug report closed. Yeah. Now I'm real surprised that they did. Oh, it has been locked. This conversation has been locked as too heated and limited to collaborators.
Well, in all fairness, though, the biggest complaint about it was there was no real announcement. It just came in the update. And so if people just updated and wait a minute, it broke. What happened?
No, that's fair. That's fair that it just updated and broke. That's a pain. It's a very Microsoft thing.
Yes,
par for the course for Microsoft products, but it is a
update Windows all the time and it just breaks. No announcement.
I've just installed Windows off a DVD before and it breaks. Famously, there was a while there where every Windows 10 install, the start button wouldn't do anything. Fresh install off the DVD and the start button wouldn't do anything when you clicked it. Did you run into that, Rob? Were you guys getting that?
Only saw it in one place. It wasn't actually Windows 10. It was a Windows Server 2019, give or take a few years. But I remember one server we were on. Huh?
Nah, probably
2013.
Probably newer than that.
No. It was the Windows 10 style.
Yeah,
which would have been like 16, 19.
Yeah, so it was the server image based on Windows 10. It was something.
Yes.
It was probably AMD hardware, because I think that's what I was building at the time. But I had like 3 or 4 machines that did that to me right out of the box in a row. It was
Yeah, this was a VM. It was after we upgraded from like maybe 12 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, same thing. It just we fought it, and I don't remember what we finally did to make the thing work halfway.
You pray to the Windows gods as you run SFC and DISM and updates and pray that one of them does something to fix it.
I think we disabled some things too, but
yeah. All right. Let's move on to something else about Ubuntu 24.04. Jeff, what else is Ubuntu 24.04 doing?
Well, something interesting. So we've talked in the past about low latency kernels and super high level. These are they're basically three types of kernels. Now, very, very high level simplified. So anybody that's very knowledgeable, don't throw pitchforks at me for this very, very simple view. Basically, you have three kernel types: generic, low latency, and real time. So the differences are based on throughput versus latency. So generic gives the most throughput, but has the highest latency switching between tasks. Going from generic to low latency means that more IRQs, but not all, can be preempted and prioritized. Preemption is enabled throughout the kernel and there's a config, for example, config_preempt instead of config_preempt voluntary. So the latency debugging tools are also enabled so that a user can determine what kernel operations are blocking progress. And the interrupt timer frequency is set to 1,000 hertz instead of 250 hertz. So it's allowing more preemption, not everything, but a lot more. Well, real time then adds more patches and tweaks to allow more preemption and not allow the kernel to spend too much time on uninterruptible tasks. And when the real-time kernel needs to handle something, it will make sure it isn't busy handling something else. So real-time is a lot more strict and forceful on how you prioritize your interrupts. So there's a lot more details for that, but just know that a real-time kernel isn't the same as a low-latency kernel. Now, I'm bringing this around to Ubuntu 24.04. Canonical has been looking at folding their low-latency patches into the main kernel release. As of right now, it looks like they will move forward with it. Michael Larable over at Phronix has been running some benchmarking and changing the clock from 1,000 hertz to 250 hertz and back and forth, and he's not seen any regression. Canonical's Andrea Rai, sorry if I butchered that, has been doing some benchmarking as well and has not seen any scary results, and interestingly found that the faster clock speed resulted in slightly lower power use when under load. He does note that it's possible there are some corner cases where this could lead to a performance regression, but overall there's an improvement in performance benefits. Ideally, if you're going to do some heavy compile or something very CPU intensive, there should be an improvement in response if you decide to browse the web or something while your machine is chugging away at the task. There should be a little performance in gaming as well to give you a better, and performance, I mean, better feel and response to gaming, because you have faster interrupts, you get better response time. Now, from what I've seen in general, if you're running a desktop, the low latency is the one to use. Now, it is possible that server people will want to stay with the generic, where they're more focused on throughput and don't care about latency, or not nearly as much. And I'm talking about systems where they're running under heavy load almost 24/7. And some of the different articles I found were talking like if your CPU is pretty much always running 80-90% all the time, you probably want to stick with a generic, because you're in a high output production type environment. That's where you want that higher throughput. But unless you're if you're running like 60% and lower and you're on a desktop, and that 60% load most of the time, not just the occasional spike, you're probably better off running the low latency kernel. So as of right now, it looks like 24.04 is going to have kernel 6.8, and it's going to be low latency. So we'll keep everyone posted if that changes, but as of right now, it looks like that's where it's going. I know some of my co-hosts run servers. Would you worry about if you had a low latency kernel instead of a generic, or do your servers not run high enough load to worry about, or what's your thoughts?
So I don't think mine run high enough load to worry about it. I do want to point out a couple of things. First off, there aren't any patches, the difference between the two. There aren't any low latency patches. What there are is kconfig, so configuration changes. So when you go to build your Linux kernel, I don't know how many of our listeners have ever done this. If you haven't, it's fun, actually, to build a kernel and boot it. It's kind of an interesting experience. There are just reams, like dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of configuration settings when you go to build the kernel. There's a bunch of them.
Hundreds.
There's a lot of them. And some of those are like enabling and disabling various subsystems. Like, do I want to build my kernel with support for this particular driver? Do I want to build my kernel with support for this particular piece of hardware? But some of them are things about how you want the kernel to behave. Do I want my kernel to, and you touched on some of this, like, how do I want it to handle interrupts? How do I want it to handle, when one task is running and another task wants to run, preemption, things like that. A lot of those switches you can flip, you can also control on the kernel command line. And we're not talking about bash, but the command line being, when you first boot your kernel, there will be some flags that you can give it in grub. So, you'll see things like quiet, no boot wait, things of that nature. Well, a lot of these things you can tune there as well. And so the guys at Ubuntu, they got to looking at their two kernel builds. So what they were doing is they were building one kernel for low latency, and they were building an entirely separate kernel for normal. And they looked at it and went, the only actual difference that has to be there, like the only switch that we flip that cannot be flipped on that kernel command line, is this kernel hertz. And it was just a change from 250 to 1000. Everything else we can handle with throwing it on the command line. So that is the one thing that they said, if we can get rid of that, we can just go down to one kernel package instead of having to maintain two. And again, that's the thing that really Michael has been testing here, is changing that from 250 to 1000 and see if it actually makes any difference. And because it's only that one thing that's getting changed between these two kernels, it doesn't really make that much of a difference at all.
I think that's a good description, though, on the difference between low latency and the regular kernel. I never thought about it too much, but the one thing I wondered was, like, why wouldn't you just run low latency for everything? That sounds better. But your description of throughput being different, that actually makes a lot more sense now. But apparently Canonical thinks the same thing. Why not just run low latency for everything?
Well, but they're not necessarily running low latency for everything. It's just that one flag. And I think probably what makes the low latency kernels a little bit less performant is you have more what's called context switches, right? So you're going from being in kernel land to being in user land. That is running code that's actually part of the kernel to running code that's part of the other programs on your system. And swapping between those two takes time. It's actually kind of processor intensive to do it. And so, and that's one of the optimizations that you can make to get more throughput out of your machine, is to get rid of those context switches. Well, if you're going to be doing things low latency, that means to be low latency, you have to work on each of your different processes for a shorter amount of time, which means that you're switching contexts more often. That is one of the things that kills your throughput.
I think a good way to look at it is, you're sitting typing up some code, and about every half an hour, one of your kids comes in and says, "Hey, Dad, I need something." Well, you're going to get a lot more work. You're going to get a lot more work done versus, okay, you get a faster reply if they're coming in every 5 minutes, but you're not typing the code as fast because you're getting interrupted.
Your blood pressure also rises. Every time you have to answer, it's a little bit louder.
Back to your question, on my servers, though, I'm not concerned about my home servers, as I'll just give them whatever processors they need. But I do have, cloud servers, virtual, that I'm paying for based off of the number of processors and all that stuff. So I do have them provisioned, low to save cost. I'll have to be mindful of that when I upgrade it. Maybe I should even take a look now to see if it makes more sense for me to change that kernel or keep it where it's at. So knowing that could be helpful to make my cloud servers at least a little more efficient, or keep them efficient if they already are running the efficient kernel.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Ken, speaking of sitting down to type things up, let's talk about one of those programs that you can use to type things up. What's new in LibreOffice?
Well, according to Bobby Borisov, the Document Foundation has officially launched the LibreOffice 24.2. This release introduces a new calendar-based version numbering system, where it's year, month. We've actually talked about that previously, and it does help simplify the version identification for end users. Bobby starts with some fascinating numbers. This latest version represents the collaborative efforts of 166 developers who all contributed a total of 5,098 new commits to the source code. Notably, 65% of these contributors are actually volunteers, highlighting this project's significant role within the broader open source community. Moving to the new features, we see the key feature is the auto enablement of save auto recovery information. It is set by default to mitigate the risk of data loss, especially for newcomers to LibreOffice. It also sees a revamp in the notebook bar interface with significant menu improvements, better print preview support, and enriched user interaction that echoes the familiarity of that other Office applications interface. I won't mention that.
Those are the guys.
Another addition is LibreOffice 24.2 is that it stands out as the enhanced insert special character drop-down list, which now includes character descriptions, aiding you in making more informed selections. I'm just going to quickly touch on a couple of the features that have been added to each of the ones. For example, Writer introduces legal ordered listing numbering, and comments can now use styles. Calc gives you a new search field in the function sidebar deck, and it has now column and row highlighting for your active cell. Impress and Draw implemented small caps for Impress. Draw now imports multi-page TIFFs, in other words, a TIFF file with several subfiles, placing one image per page. You want to read a lot more about what's been done in LibreOffice, you can either go to use the link in the show notes to read Bobby's article. And of course, there's always the release notes that you can read.
All right. Always fun to see LibreOffice coming along. I do have to wonder, is LibreOffice ever going to pick up an email client? They were close to being the home of Thunderbird at one point.
That's a good question. With all the code they've got, would it be worth it?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably not to write one from scratch. But it would have been interesting to see Thunderbird land there.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't think they would without getting something already that they could just take off with. Yeah, because it's
the one thing missing from the Office suite, though.
Well, yeah, that's sort of the point. If you compare the LibreOffice suite to all that Microsoft offers in their Office suite, really the email client is what's missing.
I could see a collaboration between LibreOffice and Mozilla coming up.
Yeah, could be. Right, let's move into some command line tips then. And this is going to be kind of a weird grab bag of not command line tips, I think. I think Ken is the only one of us that actually has a command line tip for our command line tips. But that's okay, because these are all going to be interesting and hopefully useful. Except for Rob's. Rob's not going to be useful to anybody.
Windows again?
Again, Rob! All right, man, take it away. Yeah. What do you got?
Yeah. So although I've never seen, so I'll just say right up front, my tip is grub to win, and this is for Windows, but it's for Windows users who dual boot Linux, or really anything, dual boot anything. But so although I've never seen the issue myself, I hear that sometimes dual booting Windows and Linux, if you're using like the same hard drive, I hear it's better if you use different hard drives like I normally do. But I hear that if you use the same hard drive, it can lead to problems where Windows will take over the grub bootloader. And I don't know. I even when I share drives, I've never seen this, or I just forgot about it. I don't know. I don't remember it, but I hear people say this happens. So often with that, the fix is, it's to boot into from a repair or install media and then chroot over to your Linux, install and reinstall grub. Well, another option, something I've seen suggested, is to install grub on Windows. For less techie users, this may be the easier solution, as grub to win installs a current version of grub 2 to your C drive. You go to it, it's in GitHub. You go to it, download its zip file, open that up. Inside, there's an executable, run that. Boom, you got grub installed, and you can have grub running from your Windows side rather than your Linux side, so you don't have to worry about figuring out how are you going to get back into your Linux install to reinstall grub when Windows took over your boot. And this could also happen if you installed Linux and then installed Windows. That is the one time where I know that if you install Windows second, that it will install its bootloader over it. So instead of figuring out how to get back in, you just easily install this on Windows, and you got grub again. And there you go, grub to win.
Cool. Grub to win.
Yeah, I've never encountered that, but I guess last probably 4 or 5 years. Well, actually, I guess last couple of years, I have one Windows installation, and it is on a separate disk. But
yeah, I hear say that I've heard people say that when you upgrade Windows, sometimes it will do that. Maybe you're not upgrading Windows.
Well, I get into it maybe once a year, but even when I do, I guess I always had Windows first, and then I would install Linux, its own partition, and I might have always had a separate EFI for it as well. I can't remember now. It's been a while, but Windows never stomped on it for my case anyway.
Yeah,
well, I hear many people say it will.
Just don't install Windows on the same box. I don't always install Windows, but when I do, it's a virtual machine. All right, I've got a tip, and I've got to admit, this is one I haven't tried out yet, but it's on the to-do list, but it's also a solution to a problem that, well, if you're a developer, this is a problem you might have. And that is getting your code to cross-compile for something like the Raspberry Pi. I'm involved in a couple of projects, and we do all of our development on x86, and it would be really nice to be able to build images for running on the Pi. Cross-compilation is complicated. And while you can do, we're talking mainly about GitHub with this, and the GitHub continuous integration stuff, where you have your GitHub runners, and you set it up to where you have like a nightly run where you generate your binaries and all of that. You can set up a runner on a Raspberry Pi. So I've got 2 Raspberry Pi CM4s. They're right over there in a Turing Pi case, and each of them are set up to be GitHub runners. There's 2 problems with that. One, some of the things that you might need to compile might need more storage space than you've got on your Raspberry Pis, which that's one of the problems I hit. And then the other one is there's actually some real security dangers with running your own GitHub runners. when you're on a project where people can send in pull requests. And that's actually a thing here. Someone could send in a pull request. It could change a certain file, and that file would get executed during the process of, running the CI run. And so, it's a little dirty. It's not the way you want to do things. It turns out there is actually a ready to go ARM runner action. It's by pguyot/arm-runner-action. And this is a ready to go GitHub action. And it's got all the stuff built into it and has some really nice examples too, to where you can take your existing GitHub CI stuff and just tell it to run on this, and you will get ARM binaries out the other end of it, which is just great. And setting this up with a project that I'm working on is going to happen soon, maybe this weekend, especially if we get snowed in tomorrow. And this will probably be something I'll work on. But again, this is one of those real niche problems. Not everybody is going to need this. But boy, if you need this, this appears to be the solution for it. So there you go. For all those programmers that need to cross-compile to ARM.
You got snow coming down there?
We may have snow. Yes.
According to the weatherman.
According to some of the weathermen, we may have some snow here.
Still snowless here in Minnesota.
That's crazy.
We had it on Friday. We had some snow.
I'm not surprised.
In Idaho.
I'm not surprised that Idaho's getting snow still. All right. Jeff, what does bifurcation mean?
Well, this is kind of a story about a little adventure I had this week. And PCI bifurcation is a feature that allows the division of data lanes in a PCIe slot. So you might have a PCIe by 16 slot, but now some motherboards this is not universally done. So not every motherboard supports this. You can turn it into an 8x8 or a 4x4x4x4, meaning that if you have it say 4x4x4x4, your PCIe by 16 slot acts like 4 individual 4-lane PCIe slots. Now, I ran into this trying to install a multi-drive setup in a PCIe slot. It was like it's U.2 or an NVMe type drive. You can get cards where you can put several NVMe little drives in a single card. But the thing is, you have to make sure is if you're doing this, that your PCIe supports bifurcation to be able to split those up, because if it doesn't, and you plug those 4 drives, or you got a couple big U.2 drives, you stick them in, it's only going to see the first one because it can't see the other ones. So each drive has to have its own dedicated PCIe connection, and PCIe bifurcation is how you do that. Something to be careful of too, your motherboard could have a by 16 slot, but it's a physical slot and it's only electrically by 4. So before you buy these multi-drive cards that plug into a PCIe slot, make sure that you can split those lanes up as you need, whether by 2, by 4, whatever your card says it requires, and that you electrically have the PCIe connections to make it happen. So just wanted to bring that up and be aware, because I had a couple drives I was going to do a RAID 0 on for the heck of it, and I couldn't do it. It could only recognize one drive. Now I have a workaround, but just something for everybody to be aware of.
Yeah. Now, I think some of those cards will actually do that for you, won't they? Where they'll, instead of just being passive, they'll actually have like an active PCIe switch.
A few of them will, but they're going to cost you a lot more than, if you see a $30 card, it's not going to do that. you're spending some bank.
I imagine
for me, the cheaper solution is I'm going to rotate a drive, and I have an NVMe to U.2 connector. I'll plug into an existing NVMe slot, leave the drive on that card, and just plug into that drive with that adapter.
Yeah, there you go. Makes sense.
But I doubt we'll be using bifurcation with the Raspberry Pi anytime soon.
It would be a requirement if you're going to have well, it depends on your lanes, but if you had, say, a by 8 and you wanted to plug 2 NVMe drives in, you would have to have a by 4 option. So it's going to depend on how many lanes you have and what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, so the Pi 5, the PCIe that's exposed on the board is just an X1, so no bifurcation there. But that's not the only lane that it's got. I can't remember how many it actually has total. But if you get into like the compute module, then all of those are going to be available. So it might be in some cases, might be a thing.
Yeah. So, and like Jonathan said, if it doesn't have that, say you've got even just a by 8, if you want to plug in something that requires a by 4 and it's a double type card, you either have to have it support that, or you have to get one with the PCIe switching that it can actually do the bifurcation on the card, the expansion card itself.
One of the craziest things when it comes to PCIe that I've ever seen that works is the forum thread where the guy got the nice new video card. It was like PCIe X16 video card. And he only had, I think it was like a by 4 port. And the solution was, just take a Dremel and cut the extra pins off and then plug it into the by 4 and it'll work. And, everybody that saw it at first was like, no, don't do that. Wait a second. That probably would actually work, wouldn't it?
Yeah, PCIe is pretty smart when it comes to that.
Yeah, it really is. It is impressive.
And that's the other way where, like I said, for example, my case, my bottom slot on the motherboard is a by 16 physical, but they only actually electrically routed 4 PCIe lanes to it.
Yeah, you'll see that. You'll see that a lot. You'll have physically multiple X16s, and you just can't use X16 on all of them at once. All right, I think Ken is up next. You've got a different sort of tip for us.
Yes, I do. This one was inspired by the conversation that was going through the open forum this week about trying to rebuild a file from several different backups by trying to find lines duplicated in each file. I got to thinking about how you can compare files and find differences between them. This is where diff comes in. It compares the contents of 2 files and displays the difference between them. Unlike its fellow members, CMP or comp and com, it tells us which lines in one file must be changed to make the 2 files identical. If the line is in the first file, only diff will indicate the change made to make the 2 files identical. If the line is in the first file only, diff will indicate you should delete it. If in the second file only, you'd want to add that line to the first file. Since there are a lot of options discussed in the man page for diff, I am only going to cover a few of them. And I see Jonathan's got my screen shared, so I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate. The basic command is diff followed by the name of your 2 files. Now, the base file is actually the second file. The first file is compared to it. When you type it, you're going to have a lot of information appear up. If you're looking on the screen or watching the video, you're going to see that the very first line starts off with what looks like a hexadecimal number. It's actually a number, a special character, and then another number. The numbers correspond to the lines in the first and second file, and the letter in between them indicates whether or not you need to change the line in the first file, or you need to add the line from the second file to the first file, or if you need to just delete the line in the first file to make it equal to the second file. And based on that, it's also going to then show you right after that the line in question. If you'll have either less than or greater than signs used to indicate which file it is. If it's pointing to the left on your screen, it means it's the first file. If it's pointing to the right on your screen, it's going to be the second file. So you'll see that in this case, the two files I've compared, it's going to line 66. And the first file, it gives the what that line is. Then it gives 3 dashes to separate from the line from the second file. And on the video, you'll see I'm moving my cursor around where the difference is. In the first file, it just has you running fplay with none of its options, whereas in the second file, it's running fplay with the hide banner and seek interval options. And as you're going further down, you'll see it does the same for other sets of files. Now, what's really handy is being able to see that difference in color by doing -- color equals auto. Make sure I put the space between that and the file name for the first file. It gives you the exact same information, but this time you'll see that if you're watching the video, in my case, my system's set up so that the first file is shown in like a light red, and the second file's lines are shown in green color. That helps you to differentiate between the two. Now, there's two other commands that I find handy, and one is -C, which will let you do what's called back at my notes here for a minute. It's basically to do a context. And the way this works is it goes through the file. It starts off by giving you the names of the two files, the date and time they were last modified for each one. Then it gives you the lines from the first file that are either different or matching. If it has two spaces in front, it means they're the same as in the second file. If it has an exclamation point in front of it, there's a change between the first and second file on that particular line. If it has a minus, then it would be that you need to delete that line to make it both files exactly the same. If it has a plus, and this is usually for files and lines from the second file, it means you would need to add them to the first to make both files identical. And another one that is very handy is -U, which gives you a very concise description of what you need to do. The -U can actually be used with the redirect to create a patch file for making patches. And I've got a link in the show notes if you want to follow that to find out a bit more about doing that.
The -U is the one that I'm most familiar with. That one just feels like home when you bring that one up. we work with that a lot in doing programming and throwing patches around.
Because it makes it easier to find the changes. You can save just those changes to a text file.
Yeah.
And then use that to basically rewrite them into the whatever file you need to.
Yep. So there is one of the things that fascinates me with diff is you can use it for more than just source code, and you're using it to look at your alias files. but you can use it to compare the differences of log output from multiple runs of a program. You can all kinds of data you can look at with diff, and it's great for managing changes in source code. But some of those other things are really useful as well to get a quick feel for how something has changed. So
say you've got different versions of a book you may have been working on that you've got saved as text files.
Yeah.
You can use it to see, did I do that here?
Sure. All kinds of good stuff.
Especially if you're digging through your backups, trying to remember where you put the latest backup.
Yeah, we were talking before. I've used this on contracts to see what the differences are, because some large corporate contracts, I mean, they might have 10 pages of very small print boilerplate, and you just got to make sure nothing changed in there. But without having to read all of it all over again, you can just throw it into diff and go, oh, okay, that's all the same, and highlight the changes so you speeds things up.
Yep, I can see it. I can definitely see that. All right, well, those are our tips. That's our news and our tips. I will let each of you get the last word in before we go. If you want to plug anything, and we'll start with Jeff. What do you have for us, sir?
Nothing too much, but this is just for Ken and Jonathan, since they're thinking snow. So my poem is: first snow, then silence. This $1,000 screen dies so beautifully.
Oh.
And relevant if you upload and hack your TV you're talking about. But other than that, I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
All right, Rob.
All right. Oh, I got nothing special. Except for one thing. If you guys have been paying attention to the Steam survey, we've gotten so close to my 2%. December numbers, when we did my predictions, we weren't there yet. It's at 1.97 though for December, 1.95 for January. So close. We're getting there. I will get my prediction. But otherwise, come connect. RobertPCampbell.com. You can find links to my LinkedIn and my Mastodon there, and a spot to donate a coffee for me for all the hard work I do. Yep. Connect, chat, donate if you want.
Cool. I like it. And Ken?
Well, since we're in winter, I just wanted to go ahead and move into spring and talk about spring cleaning a bit. One of the first things you may want to do before you start cleaning out your system is back it up.
I approve. All right. Thank you guys for each of you being here. It was a lot of fun. I want to say also thank you to the folks in the Discord. Had a good crowd again today. Let's see. We've got like 10 people watching live. It's great. I love it. Love to see it. And for all of you that get us on the download too, we appreciate that. There's been a little rumor that we might go out to more people. It may not be a Club Twit exclusive anymore. We'll see what happens with that. Just a rumor. Nothing set in stone yet, but we'll see what happens. You can follow my work over at Hackaday. So every Friday morning we have the security column goes live, and then also we've got Floss Weekly over there and some fun stuff. This upcoming Wednesday we're talking about open source DevOps. The week after that, we're talking with one of the a maintainer for, I think, a couple of different Linux distros about Wayland and all sorts of stuff. And then the week after that, we're talking with Eben Upton, who is the Raspberry Pi guy. All sorts of fun stuff coming. You don't want to miss it. Thank you again to everybody, and we'll see you next time on the Untitled Linux Show.